The screams came first, sharp enough to cut through the music and laughter. Glass shattered, chairs toppled, and for a second it felt like the whole room forgot to breathe. At the center of it all was my sister Emily, the golden child of our family, kneeling on the marble floor in her perfect designer gown. Her voice cracked as she screamed my name, eyes wild with a mix of rage and disbelief. Around her, armed agents poured into the ballroom, their movements precise and unyielding. The dream wedding she had bragged about for months was collapsing before her eyes, and every guest stared in stunned silence. I didn't move. I stood still, watching the chaos as if I had always known this moment would come. To Emily, I had always been the boring sister, the one with a dull military career that nobody in our family ever celebrated. She was the star, the one everyone adored, while I was expected to sit quietly in the corner, unnoticed and unimpressive. What she never understood was that my silence was never weakness. It was preparation. My name is Captain Jessica Miller. I serve in the United States Marine Corps. To my family, I was invisible. But to the people I serve with, I was something far more. That night, in the middle of Emily's glittering wedding, the world finally collided with the truth I had been living all along. And to understand why it ended in chaos, I need to take you back to where it really began. I grew up in Texas, where the summers were long and hot, and the expectations in our house were even heavier. From the start, my parents made it clear who the shining star was. Emily was their diamond, the girl they believed would dazzle the world with her beauty, charm, and the way she could light up a room with just a smile. I, on the other hand, was the quiet one, the daughter who chose structure, discipline, and the uniform of the Marines over fancy dresses and pageants. Whenever relatives came to visit, my parents showed off Emily's trophies from dance recitals and framed photos of her in gowns. My achievements, high test scores, varsity athletics, and later my decision to enlist barely earned a nod. I remember overhearing my mother once laugh to her friends, saying, "Jessica is so serious, almost like a boy. But Emily, she's our real girl." The words stung, but I learned to swallow the bitterness and let it sit in silence. The clearest memory I have is from one Thanksgiving. The table was filled with turkey, casseroles, and the sound of my father's booming laughter as Emily held court. She had just returned from a trip to New York, showing off photos of penthouse suites and designer shopping bags. Everyone clapped and marveled at her stories, hanging on every detail. When the attention finally drifted for a second, I mentioned that I had been awarded a commendation for leadership during training exercises. My father gave me a distracted smile and muttered, "That's nice, Jess," before immediately turning back to Emily, asking her to tell another story about the city lights. I sat there, chewing slowly, pretending it didn't matter. But inside, I felt like I was fading into the wallpaper. My medal, earned through sweat and grit, was invisible to them. Emily's shopping trip, paid for with my parents' money, was the centerpiece of the evening. That was the rhythm of my childhood. Her brilliance celebrated, my effort dismissed. Over time, I stopped trying to compete for their attention. The uniform I wore, the sacrifices I made, the miles I ran, and the battles I trained, for none of it was enough in their eyes. To them, Emily was everything they ever wanted, and I was the reminder of the daughter who never quite fit their vision. It was a lesson in silence, in learning how to carry my pride without applause. Emily became what my parents always dreamed she would be. She was the glittering star on the society pages, photographed at charity galas with a glass of champagne in her hand, her smile wide enough to blind anyone who doubted her charm. Reporters called her a rising socialite, and my parents clipped every article, taping them to the refrigerator like trophies. To them, Emily was proof they had raised perfection. Her engagement to Daniel Volkov was the crown jewel. The man was older, polished, and wealthy beyond measure. His company controlled shipping routes across the globe, and at the engagement party, guests whispered his name, like he was royalty. My father walked through the room with his chest puffed, introducing Emily, as if she had secured not just a husband, but an empire. My mother glowed beside him, beaming as Emily held up her ring for anyone who hadn't already seen it. I stood near the back, a glass of water in my hand, watching the scene like an outsider in my own family. Every laugh, every toast, every admiring glance circled around Emily. She glided across the room in a designer gown while I remained invisible in the corner, my uniform and my service irrelevant in this world of glitter and power. For them, Emily was the princess in her castle, and I was just the shadow on the wall. In the Marines, I was not invisible. My name there was Raven 7, a code name that carried weight inside briefing rooms where the stakes were measured in lives and global security. I specialized in tracking weapons trafficking, building patterns out of scattered numbers and fragments of intelligence. What others dismissed as noise, I could weave into a map that exposed entire networks. My commanding officers trusted me, my team respected me, and every analysis I delivered mattered. There were no polite pats on the head in that world. There were firm nods, steady salutes, and the unspoken understanding that competence was survival. I had earned my place, not by being someone's favorite, but by showing up every day with discipline and precision. My teammates saw me for what I was, a Marine who could be counted on when everything else was uncertain. But the moment I left the base and returned to family dinners, all of that disappeared. To them, I was still the daughter who had chosen a boring desk job in uniform, a role they neither understood nor valued. They didn't know the hours I spent in secure rooms, piecing together the evidence that kept weapons out of dangerous hands. They didn't care that Raven 7 was vital to missions they would never hear about. At home, I was invisible again, and the sharp contrast between the two worlds was a loneliness I carried in silence. The call came late in the evening, when I was sitting at my desk going over reports. My mother's voice was soft, almost pleading, the way she sounded whenever she wanted me to fold for Emily's sake. She didn't ask how I was or what I was working on. Instead, she went straight to the point. "Jess, please, when the wedding comes, don't make things difficult. Just smile, sit quietly, and let your sister have her moment." I closed my eyes, gripping the phone a little tighter. She had no idea that the diamond ring on Emily's hand was bought with laundered money. Or maybe she did, and chose not to care. She didn't know the champagne and flowers had been paid for by men I was already tracking, men who moved weapons under the guise of business deals. To her, the only thing that mattered was peace at the table and Emily's shine in the spotlight. It wasn't the first time she had asked me to be smaller, to dim whatever light I had so that Emily could glow without shadows. "She deserves this happiness," she insisted, her voice heavy with that old mix of guilt and pressure. I wanted to tell her the truth, to spill every detail of the dirt I had uncovered, but I stayed silent. The words pressed against my chest, heavy and sharp, but I swallowed them down. By the time the call ended, I felt the same familiar ache I had carried for years. To my family, justice meant nothing if it ruined the picture they wanted to present to the world. And once again, I was left in the same place I had always been, standing between duty and blood, caught between what I knew was right and what my family wanted me to ignore. The next morning, I walked into the secure briefing room with a plan already burning in my mind. Around the table sat agents from NCIS and Interpol, men and women who had seen every kind of operation. But even they hesitated when I laid out my idea. I told them the wedding wasn't just a family affair, it was the perfect staging ground. All the key players would be there, relaxed, arrogant, certain of their power. And I was the one person they would never suspect. At first, my commanding officer shook his head. "Too personal, too risky," he said, his voice sharp with authority. But I didn't flinch. I explained how my access as Emily's sister gave me something no other operative could have. I showed them how the financial patterns lined up, how this event could give us the final confirmation we needed to bring down Daniel Volkov's entire network. My voice didn't waver. My words were steady, calculated, each one cutting through their doubts. There was a long silence when I finished. The room was heavy with the weight of the choice. Finally, my superior leaned back, his eyes fixed on me, and gave a short nod. Operation Trojan Bride is a go. In that moment, I felt the shift. I was no longer the sister standing in the shadows. I was the architect of the strike that would either dismantle an empire or cost me everything, and I was ready for both. I slipped easily into the role of the helpful sister, smiling as Emily gushed about flower arrangements and seating charts. She thought I was finally taking an interest in her big day, never realizing I was studying every detail with the focus of a soldier preparing for battle. While she flipped through magazines, I carefully noted the layout of the ballroom, the entry points, and the emergency exits. Every angle mattered, because one wrong detail could cost us everything. When she handed me the guest list, asking me to double-check spellings, I memorized the names I had already flagged in our intelligence files. Associates, relatives, men with clean records but dirty money flowing through offshore accounts. It was like watching pieces on a chessboard slide into place, each one bringing me closer to the endgame. I kept my expression neutral, nodding and pretending to care about the linens, while my mind was on tactical positions and surveillance zones. A few days before the wedding, I received the final piece, a silver dog tag necklace fitted with a micro-transmitter, disguised as nothing more than a keepsake from my time in the Corps. It felt cool against my skin, a reminder of the line I was about to cross. To Emily, I was just her sister, tagging along. To everyone else in the operation, I was Raven 7, the insider preparing to light the fuse. The storm was coming, and I was the one holding the match. The Florida Keys were glowing that evening, the sky painted in shades of pink and gold, as the ocean breeze drifted into the open-air ballroom. Crystal chandeliers reflected against champagne flutes, and a string quartet played as if the night itself belonged to Emily. She walked through the crowd like she owned it, her gown trailing behind her, every head turning in admiration. For my parents, this was the moment they had been waiting for all their lives. Their perfect daughter, radiant in luxury, marrying into power. I stood near the edge of the dance floor, blending into the background the way I always had. From a distance, I studied the security detail, the entrances, the clusters of men who carried themselves with the stiff posture of men used to giving orders. But my eyes kept drifting back to Emily, the center of it all, glowing with the confidence of someone who had never known what it felt like to be overlooked. When she and Daniel swept past me in the middle of a dance, her smile widened. She leaned just close enough for her words to cut like a blade. "Still pretending your little marine job matters, Jess?" Her tone dripped with mockery, and Daniel's smirk confirmed that he shared the joke. To them, my service, my sacrifice, my entire career was nothing more than a punchline. I felt the sting, sharp and immediate, but I held my face still. Years of training had taught me how to mask pain, how to channel it into something colder and more useful. The ballroom spun with laughter and applause, but inside me, the words settled like a final entry in a ledger that had been filling since childhood. That was the moment I knew this night would not just end in champagne toasts. The storm was already breaking, and Emily had no idea she had just handed me the spark. As the music swelled and the crowd cheered, I noticed Daniel lean close to his father near the head table. His voice dropped low, meant only for him, but my ears had been trained for this. The Russian words slid off his tongue with careless confidence, a confirmation code tied to a shipment we had been chasing for months. He thought no one in that glittering room could understand. He thought wrong. I lifted my hand to the silver dog tag resting against my chest, a gesture that looked casual, even vain, as if I was fixing my necklace. My lips barely moved, my voice a whisper only the transmitter could catch. Iron Raven. 2 words, quiet and almost invisible in the chaos of the ballroom, but enough to pull the trigger on everything we had been building toward. 5 minutes later, the world inside that ballroom shattered. The grand doors swung open with explosive force, and a wave of black-clad Marines and Interpol agents flooded the room in perfect formation. Gasps turned to screams as guests scrambled, knocking over tables and glasses in panic. The Volkov family's empire, built on arrogance and secrecy, crumbled in seconds. I stood still, my pulse steady, watching as all the power and pride dissolved into chaos. Emily's smile vanished, Daniel's confidence drained, and the empire they flaunted fell apart because of a whisper. It only took one word to end the show. Iron Raven. The ballroom erupted into chaos, Guests screamed as agents pushed through the panicked crowd, their boots pounding against the marble floor. Daniel was slammed against the wall, his wrists pulled behind him as steel cuffs clicked into place. The man who had carried himself like a king only minutes earlier now stared at me with shock and fury burning in his eyes. Emily's scream pierced the noise. She stumbled backward, clutching at her gown, the silk dragging across broken glass as she fell to her knees. Her mascara streaked down her cheeks, her hands shaking as she pointed at me. "Jessica, what is happening? What are you doing?" The disbelief in her voice made it clear she had never once considered that I could be the one to destroy her perfect world. My parents sat frozen at their table, pale and trembling. For the first time in my life, they looked at me not with dismissal, but with fear and confusion. When one of the agents approached me and asked, "Captain Raven, 7, confirmation?" their faces collapsed. The title, the recognition, the respect they had never given me was handed to me by strangers in uniform, and in that moment, the truth was undeniable. Emily's sobs filled the room as she crawled across the floor, her perfect white dress pooling around her like a shroud. "Jess, please, tell them it's not true," she begged, her voice raw and broken. But I didn't answer. I stood calm, watching the empire unravel, knowing this was justice. The girl they had mocked, the sister they had ignored, was the same Marine who had brought the storm crashing down. 6 months later, the chaos of that night felt like a different lifetime. I was stationed at Norfolk, leading a new unit of Marines, who trusted me without question. The briefing room buzzed with energy as we pieced together intelligence, maps, and coded transmissions. Every face at the table looked to me for direction, and for the first time, I felt the weight of true command. This was my family now. The days were long and the work was relentless, but it gave me a sense of peace my childhood never had. We argued over data, planned through the night, and leaned on one another when fatigue set in. My worth was measured not by appearances or titles, but by what I delivered. And in this world, I delivered results that saved lives. One morning, as I scrolled through my inbox, I saw her name. Emily. The subject line read, "Please." The message inside was exactly what I expected. A long apology, woven with excuses, confusion, and guilt. She begged for understanding, pleaded for forgiveness, claimed she never knew who Daniel really was. I read the first few lines, my face steady, my chest calm. Then I hit delete. The email vanished into nothing, and with it, the last trace of power her words ever held over me. I didn't need her recognition, or my parents' pride, or anyone's applause. My value was carved into the work I did, the people I led, and the mission we carried forward. For years, I thought I had to prove myself to them. Now I knew I never did. I want to leave you with one thought. Have you ever been overlooked, dismissed, or treated like you were nothing, only to rise and prove that your worth was undeniable? If you have, I want to hear your story. Share it below, because this is a place where your voice matters. Maybe no one saw you before, but here, you will be heard.